immediately die.
Hey,
Right
how's it
after
going?
me.
This is Coach Scott doing another VOD review. This time it's a player YZ50. This is scrim footage of him and his 6 stack. You'll see throughout this gameplay that this player, he's actually really quite good on Tracer. So instead of focusing on issues like his aiming, we're going to be focusing on issues like his targeting is sometimes poor and his ult usage is the biggest problem. He ends up going for huge amounts of time without using his ultimate at all. Huge mistake, since as Tracer, especially with such good aim, against the team comp that he is against, which is full of tanks, he should be able to charge his ultimate every 30 seconds or so, so holding it for 3-4 minutes in a row is one of the worst mistakes you can make. Right off the bat here, what this player should be noticing is that the enemy team has a Roadhog, so they're actually running, I believe, a triple tank comp. They have Winston, Reinhardt, and Roadhog with Soldier and a Lucio. So what you're going to want to do in this, anytime you're playing Tracer or Genji or another DPS hero, you should see the Roadhog as free ultimate percentage. In a normal dive comp where you're coordinated with your team, as Tracer you'd like to just focus the same target that your Winston and your Genji would be focusing, but because they do have the enemy Roadhog, the correct approach is to just fire shots into him until you can charge up your ultimate, and then use your pulse bomb for a free kill on the Winston, Reinhardt, or Roadhog, since they're pretty immobile, so you can land an easy pulse bomb, get a free pick, and then start a fight 5v6 with zero problems.
That's not gonna work if we split up.
This is what I meant when I said this player had targeting issues. He's been focusing the Soldier and the Lucio and the Ana, basically whoever's closest to him, and he can get away with it because he has such good aim, but it's not the right targets for him to be focusing. If instead he was doing my approach and just trying to charge up his ultimate really quickly, he would have had his ultimate a long time ago, and they could have started this fight a lot quicker. After this team fight, you can see that Roadhog is the last one alive on the enemy team, which is sort of the opposite of what you want if you're taking the other approach of starting off with your pulse bomb. Instead, the supports would have been the last to die, and especially when you have a Winston on your team, you can think of how terrible it is to have the enemy Roadhog alive for this long in a fight. Anytime the Winston wants to do anything, he's at risk of being one-shot. You can also see that YZ at this point still has his pulse bomb ready. As Tracer, you really don't want to have your pulse bomb up at any time. You want to be using it almost as quickly as you get it, because you're able to charge it so quickly. And as I said earlier, you're against a tanky team, you're a skilled player mechanically, you should be using your ultimate every time it's off cooldown, and that way you'll get more picks and you'll win more fights quicker and give yourself a heavier time bank at the end of the match. Right here we see that YZ's teammate Genji goes in way too far alone, uses his Dragon Blade, which is a pretty big waste, but here luckily he has his pulse bomb ready and the enemy team is grouped up towards the end of the Lucio sound barrier. Here would have been a really good opportunity to drop the pulse bomb in and try and salvage some of that ultimate usage by your teammate. This is also a really good example of why this player is too stingy with their ultimates. At this point you're halfway through the street stage and you haven't used your ultimate once, so you gotta be thinking, have I been missing opportunities? Could I create more opportunities? And I would say yes, 100%. It appears to me that the player YZ is trying to look for an opportunity to use a pulse bomb, and later on, because his teammate switched to Zarya, you can see him asking, what's the cooldown on Graviton Surge? When is it ready? And I don't think that's the right approach he should be taking. He should be looking to make opportunities with his pulse bomb instead of looking for his teammates to create them, especially because Graviton Surge only happens once every couple minutes. So really just blink into the enemy Reinhardt, drop your pulse bomb down and try and fire a couple shots. The enemy team doesn't have anything to deal with that. They don't have a Zarya, they don't have, maybe they have a sound barrier. Actually they shouldn't because of the Genji ult earlier. So this would be a free way to get a 5v6 fight that you're going to win anyway, especially because you're winning fights that are 6v6. Almost 4 full minutes into the game, the player uses their first pulse bomb. This is what I've been talking about the whole time, is that you would have had the opportunity to get 4 pulse bombs in that time, and instead you get one that gets eaten by a D.Va defense matrix. This is such a huge mistake. Just use them more often, and in this specific scenario, you should be looking before you're diving into there. It's a bit of a risk not to check. I know that they didn't have a D.Va before, but if all you had to do was slightly look left and see they have a D.Va, and you probably would have been more stingy with your pulse bomb, which might have even been a bad thing because this player is already stingy enough. Now comes the more important part. It took him 20, maybe 30 seconds to get his pulse bomb charged after losing it. The enemy team has had a Roadhog the entire game, and you would have been able to charge your ultimate this quickly off of his huge head hitbox, but you hadn't been using them, so you have no idea how quickly you could have been charging them.
I think they spotted you. Yeah.
So here the player recognizes that his teammate on Zarya has a Graviton Surge available, and they're going to combo these abilities together to try and get a team wipe. Unfortunately, they don't push the cart far enough in order to get a team wipe that'll secure them the game. The other thing is that their teammate Reaper gets a pick onto the enemy D.Va, so you know that she's going to be respawning later, and she is the best person at stalling out points like this. My hope is that in the future, this team will realize that the cart was simply not pushed far enough. All it takes is one person to know that. Either the Zarya or the Tracer should be aware of that and say, no, let's push it a few more meters, especially because they're down a man in this specific scenario. They're going to let you push them. They're not going to engage a fight because then they'll lose 5v6 anyway. So all you have to do is say, push it a bit farther, and then we'll initiate, because this ability will guarantee a team kill. Here he gets killed by an unlucky Mei shot. There's some argument to be made that he should have been focusing on Mei since Mei was shooting at her, but in a situation like this, it's really difficult to recognize that. I would say in general, you want to be keeping your focus towards the enemies that are going to deal the most damage to you, but that's usually a McCree or a Roadhog, someone with abilities that you need to dodge. Mei is not one of those heroes, so I don't think that this player did anything wrong here. He just got unlucky, or the enemy Mei is good, which is not something you could have known because they just switched to it.
Yeah, Ryan got wrecked.
I think it's safe to say after the first half ends that this player has unreal aim. His mechanical skills are really good. You can even see that his movement, he's able to duck and dive through places that most Tracer players wouldn't be able to. But the problem is that he's just not using ultimates properly, and with his team, they're not targeting down the right targets, which might just be a lack of information. Perhaps after watching this video, they might realize that this is what they should be doing and change their play. But at this point, I'd put him at like a high Masters player, maybe in the middle of Masters, because his aim is just so unparalleled with people that I even see at my elo. But the rest of this is what is holding him back and where he needs to improve as a player. So I'm going to be looking for that in the second half of this match. Looking at the team composition, you can see that our player, the Tracer, is going to be responsible for killing the divers, specifically a Winston or a D.Va to try and dive in. Because they have the Reinhardt as a front-facing shield and a D.Va to potentially block shots from any divers like a Tracer or a Genji, it's going to be up to Tracer to kill the enemy Winston as quickly as possible so that he's not able to get kills on his supports. The positioning that the player takes here is alright. Against any composition, you're going to be safe to escape here from Tracer, and it will allow you to see the enemy team comp quicker and potentially make a reaction. If you need to dive into their backline against their team comp, then you're going to be able to know that quicker and be in position to do it. All he has to make sure is that he doesn't die and that he's going to be able to escape.
Yeah, baby. Feed me.
My worry with this positioning is that this player does not have the same idea about what his role is in his team comp that I do, and that if they're against a dive comp, his supports are going to die without him being able to deal any damage to the enemy Winston. When the game begins, this player is immediately contested by the enemy Genji. He's able to escape, but because Genji came into that building first and started firing on him, he was not able to see the enemy team comp. This means that instead of being able to reset and group with his team, he now has to stay in a farther up position than he would like to in order to see the team comp and be able to react to whatever it is. Again, he's contested by the enemy Genji, and he still hasn't seen the enemy team comp. They're taking a surprisingly long amount of time to set up for their engagement. This makes me think that it really is a dive comp, and you can see that Winston dives into the backline, and our player here, the Tracer, is in no position to help push him off of the allied supports. Because the player wasn't in the right position to protect his supports and try and push the enemy Winston away, they end up falling way back into the streets phase, and they're not able to get any heals off on the allied soldier or on this player as the Tracer, and they both die. Without any DPS, especially against an enemy Pharah, which you need hit scan to deal with, your team is not going to win this fight, and they should just back off and run away.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna go in.
Here the player accurately focuses down the Winston, and they're able to get a kill on him early. Because of this, Winston is usually the primary hero that's supposed to deal with you as Tracer and sort of keep you separated from their allies. And once Winston's dead, you have a whole lot more room because it's a whole lot harder to hit Tracer if you're not playing Winston. So the player smartly just gets in their backline and starts dealing damage and is able to charge up their ultimate and regroup with their team. Now that the player has pulse bomb ready, they have a lot to think about. The enemy team has a Pharah and they have a Zarya. So Pharah is never going to be grouped with the team. You should never expect for your pulse bomb to kill them. Zarya is always going to have a shield available to save herself and likely a teammate. So you need to try and get those cooldowns to be used by Zarya before you want to use your pulse bomb. The last thing that this player needs to think about is that His team is at a really far forward position on the streets phase. You don't really care about holding this position. Yeah, it's nice, but you have a whole lot more room to regroup and take another fight backwards a bit. So you might be thinking about using Tracer as your initiation tool, because her ultimate charges so quickly that you can try and win a fight in this first stages of the streets, and then charge up ultimate and try and win another fight with Pulse Bomb later in the streets phase. Right here is the perfect opportunity for Tracer to use Pulse Bomb. Keep in mind that this is the player that uploaded the post onto competitive Overwatch subreddit that said that if you're able to stick a Zarya shield at a certain time, right as it ends, the Pulse Bomb will drop and it will get a secured kill no matter the target if their health is low enough. So when you see Zarya and Reinhardt grouped up like this and their shields are about half over, this is the perfect opportunity to try and land a stick and turn the fight. Because the player still has Pulse Bomb ready, and because there's a lull in gameplay or action right here, let's talk about who they should be targeting with their Pulse Bomb. Because the enemy team has a Zarya, this is the ideal target for the player to hit. What I'm not saying is this is who they should focus, but if Zarya doesn't have her shield and she's standing still and you have the opportunity to stick a Pulse Bomb on her, that's who you would want to hit, as that's who will turn the fight the most in your favor without them having Zarya shields. Because that's not likely, because she will likely save her shield, you probably shouldn't focus her. Instead, what you should be waiting to do is, because she will be able to shield anyone in the front line or anyone in her sights, and you won't be able to hit people who are extremely mobile. You can't hit the enemy Genji, you can't hit the enemy Lucio. Who you're going to want to target is the enemy Ana, who's pretty immobile, who you don't have to hit directly. You can stick it on the ground near here and land a couple shots and get a kill on. And all you have to do is time it right with the enemy's engagement so that Zarya is looking in front and will potentially miss her shield or have already used it. Here the player is just dancing with the enemy Genji, which is fine. There's a few ways to think about who has the advantage here. Mobility wise, Tracer can regroup with her team faster than Genji can. Tracer has a lower health pool by 50, and it's a bit harder to hit Tracer as Genji than Genji as Tracer. But ultimately this fight doesn't matter at all, it's even. There will be no advantage for either player in this duel. So here the player on Tracer is one of the only ones on his team with an ultimate. The other one is Ana, who has her nano boost ready. What you could be looking to do here is try and stave off the enemy team. Maybe drop your Pulse Bomb on someone who's in a poor position before the fight starts. This will allow your team to maybe get some chip damage on the enemy team, or if your team takes chip, then you can charge up your Lucio ult as well. And that way when the next fight comes around, you will have more ultimates available. As I said earlier, Zarya is the person that you want to get a Pulse Bomb kill on the most, and the player is able to do that, so they should not be worried after he gets this easy stick that they should be losing this fight in any capacity. This is a one fight, and they do clean it up pretty easily after this. This is pretty strange from the enemy team. They've lost Zarya, they've lost Pharah, and I guess they do get a pick on our team's Reinhardt, but they decide to engage on this fight and use ultimates, and they end up just getting wiped, and they got nothing to gain for it. Something to consider as Tracer is that it's not easy to take high ground, so whenever there's a lull in the fight, or if you get a team wipe and there's high ground advantage that you can take that may take you some time to get to, that's the opportunity to take it, and that's what he does here. The problem I see here is that this player is acting too timid on the high ground. They're not really getting any shots or damage, and that's not what you want to be doing as Tracer. Something small to note is that when your teammate uses your Diva ult, you want to be getting in there. They're not going to be able to shoot at you because they're going to be scrambling to find cover, and you can see that the enemy Zarya even stands out in the middle of the open to try and charge her shield off of the damage from the ultimate. If you were in a position to maybe shoot the shield and potentially break it, she could have just suicided for no reason. You can see their team is actually able to pull this fight around through the help of a nano visor, and that our player here on Tracer has another Pulse Bomb ready. The ideal time to use a Pulse Bomb in a team fight is when the enemy reaches the point of no return, where they can't back out of the fight, but they can't really engage the fight because they're a man down from your Pulse Bomb. So ideally this player will use it then on one of the tankier targets. Again, I think the player is being too timid here by just sitting on the high ground and dealing small amounts of damage. The team fight's going down on the bottom side, and his team's actually dying to a Graviton Surge, and he's just trying to deal small amounts of damage to the enemy Lucio and Genji.
shield, break the shield.
Because the point is almost captured here, this player really cannot afford to have his team be entirely wiped, so he needs to find an opportunity to use his pulse bomb. He doesn't end up doing that, and they lose the point. Because this is a scrim, they don't play into the bonus rounds, they just call it a tie, 2-2. Ultimately, this player has the aim and movement abilities of a pro player, but they don't use their ultimate nearly often enough, and their targeting is sometimes whoever's closest, and other times it's just not the right targets. If they work on this individually and as a team, they're going to improve. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Coach Scott, and I hope you learned something.